Hello, and welcome to Lives Not Labels Seeing Beyond Stigma, a podcast where stories come before stereotypes and people are always more than the labels placed on them. This podcast is centered on conversations with people who have lived experience, individuals who speak from their own journey, challenges, and growth. Through honest dialogue, we aim to amplify voices that are too often misunderstood, overlooked, or reduced to assumptions. This isn't just a podcast, it's an invitation to reflect, to empathize, and to see people as they truly are, to see them as lives, not labels. Thanks for listening.
The first question, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you beyond your experiences with substance use?
My name's Dave. I'm a St. Johner. Lived here my whole life, and I recently just finished some schooling. Went to the University, New Brunswick St. John, and just completed a master's degree in experimental psychology. And I have a wife. Just recently got married back in October, and also have a daughter who is 7 years old.
What made you decide to share your story publicly?
I decided to because I was approached about it, and I thought it would be a great idea because I know that addiction doesn't discriminate; it affects everyone. And my story might resonate with someone.
What do people often get wrong about substance use and addiction?
I think a lot of people think that the person's in control, which seems like they are, but when you're using, the addiction is so powerful. Your mind's all foggy, and you start off not so bad, and then as you get more and more into it, you don't realize how far gone you've become with the addiction, how much it's consumed you. So I think, society's becoming a bit more accepting of addiction and understanding it a bit better. But there's still a lot of people, especially if, they've never struggled with addiction or they don't have anyone close to them that struggles with addiction. They tend to think that, oh, why don't you just stop? But, obviously that person is sick, and the thing that's making them do the substance is the thing you're telling them to use to stop doing the substance, and that's their mind.
Was there a point where substances were helping you cope with something? If so, what were they helping you survive, manage, or escape?
Yeah, substances, like, a lot of the times they can be used to cope, but, sometimes you just like experiencing the high itself. But to cope, it's definitely me. Like, I've struggled with not so much depression, but a lot of anxiety, a lot of anxiousness. And yeah, I do just have that sort of addictive way about me too when I do things. So it's, people use it for different reasons. Like I said, sometimes it's just the high itself, and sometimes it is to cope with things. And a lot of the times, we have these experiences throughout our life that we don't address. We just sort of ignore them. And, they sort of have an impact later on in ways that you don't even recognize. You don't know it's associated with that thing. So, I've experienced a lot of adverse childhood experiences, and that's contributed a lot to my anxiety and things like that as an adult, and a lack of healthy, like, self identity, and criticize myself a lot. And so it just, we end up using these substances. They just make you feel better.
What did the world see on the outside versus what you were experiencing on the inside?
I think it all depends. Like, when I wasn't using, or when I was seemed like I was in control at times, when it wasn't so apparent, I think people would see, someone who was doing well, that had their shit together. But, in my mind, I never felt like I did. I had almost 10 years of sobriety prior to me, picking up the bottle again, probably about 6 years ago. And those 10 years, I would use here and there, maybe like once a year, but I was never happy. A lot of people thought, I had it together, but I was struggling. In those years, I wasn't even using. And then, the years that I started using again, it became more apparent that I didn't have my shit together because, I'd be intoxicated or, I was lying a lot. I was just, hurting a lot of the people that cared about me. And, I think for those that don't know you well and they get to know you, then eventually at some point they start to see things that aren't so great.
What was it like knowing your substance use was affecting people you cared about?
At that time, you're so in denial that you just don't think of it or you don't care. You'll justify every little thing. You'll say, well, they did this to me and this is not a big deal. And, it's my choice. And you'll come up with every excuse in the book. You'll justify it and you just lie. And, at that time, it doesn't really hurt. But once you decide to get sober and your mind becomes clear, that's when everything starts flooding, like the shame and the guilt. And then you start to realize, like, wow, like, look at what I've done.
Did shame or fear ever make it harder to reach out for help?
Yeah, it did at times, like with therapists and things like that. I mean, I was always pretty okay with reaching out. I started going to AA, and it wasn't hard at first, but the more I kept relapsing, the more I was feeling like shamed, and I didn't want to go to the meetings. So it can definitely impact, someone, especially when you're always fearful of being judged and, possible rejection and things like that. So you're just trying to protect yourself and your own feelings.
Were there things your partner, family, or friends did that genuinely helped?
Yeah, like friends, not so much. I mean, they were always there if, I wanted to talk and things like that. Family definitely cared a lot about me and would reach out and just a lot of concern. And that did really help me. Like, I don't know if I'd be where I'm at today without them. It's not everything. It's not, for me, it wasn't at least the thing that was going to keep me sober, but it helped me get sober and, kept me trying.
Were there things people did with good intentions that actually made things harder?
Yeah, I think sometimes, like, control was a big one, trying to control everything I did. And yeah, I think that was one of the biggest things because it just made me want to, rebel a little more for some reason. I don't know what it was, but that was the only thing I experienced, really, that didn't work for me. I mean, I'm sure there's other people that have other things that make it difficult for them. I have had some family members that just almost don't want to talk to you or associate at that moment. They just kind of don't reach out and don't really want anything to do with you, and that hurts a bit. At that time, it justifies your use. And then later on, when you get sober, you tend to have a little resentment towards them because you think, like you weren't even there for me. But at the same time, it's, you're also causing a lot of harm, and you can understand why some people choose to do that.
What do you wish loved ones knew about supporting someone who is struggling?
I think it's really important. The number one thing that loved ones should know is that that person is sick, and all these things that they are doing isn't necessarily because they truly want to do those things to you. Their mind is clouded, foggy, they're not thinking properly, they're sick, they're caught up in their addiction. So if they lie or they steal or anything like that, it's important to know that it's not personal, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have boundaries or anything like that. There should definitely be some boundaries in place to prevent them from doing that to you if they do, but just try to have love and compassion for that person, understand that they're sick and that they don't have any control over their addiction.
What would you say to someone who believes addiction is simply a matter of willpower?
I would say that it's not. I don't know how I would explain it to them other than that the fact that it's just they don't have any power and they have no control. I've started AA probably about a year and a half ago, and the last couple months I've been sober, and I've been really digging into the program and really taking it seriously. And one of the number one things, the first step is you're powerless over alcohol, and that your life's become unmanageable. And in AA, we admit that we have absolutely no control, and that we need a power greater than ourselves to help us, right? So that's what I would say is there's no such thing, especially as an addict, because again, the thing that is making them, not making them use, but it's leading them to use, the compulsion, the behavior, the going to get the drug, that's their mind and their brain. So how can you say that thing that's making them do that now can just flip and just stop using? Like, it makes absolutely no sense.
Can you share a time when you felt judged, dismissed, or treated differently because of substance use?
Yeah, I mean, years ago I had, because before the 10 years that I had somewhat sober, we call it dirty sober, I used a lot through my youth, and I had hepatitis C, and there were a few times, especially in healthcare, people would look at me when I was sober and all cleaned up, and they'd be shocked, and they'd be asking me like how I got it, and maybe they meant nothing by it, but it's also, when you go to a dentist and a dental hygienist asks how you got it, it's not really ethical to ask a person that question. It's personal information, and they're obviously curious. Like, to me, they seem curious, and after that, I told one hygienist that, because she asked, and I told her how I got it, and then she just kept asking me questions about it, and it made it very uncomfortable because I was just there to get my teeth cleaned. I was not there to talk about, this disease that I had. There was that time. There was another time where I had a family doctor who was new to me. Similar thing. He asked, how I got hepatitis C. Asked if I was like a security guard and got stuck with a needle or something. In one sense, it's like, oh, it's kind of nice. They don't think I'm an addict. But on the other hand, it's like, well, I was. So they obviously would think bad of me if they knew the truth, or I don't know if bad's the right word, but they wouldn't think very highly of me. And not that I want to be thought of highly, but they would judge me. Mm. And recently, I had a pretty good job all lined up, ready to go. And, I have a DUI because of my use. I got caught drinking and driving, and I was charged for drinking while impaired. And, that's nobody's fault but my own, And, now I'm sober and applied for a job, got it, was all set to start working. And, I had to send them my criminal record, and I told them I can explain my DUI, and they had to withdraw my offer. And, I'm not blaming them. I have nobody but to blame but myself. But those little things that you deal with, and, you have to just keep moving forward and try not to let it stop you or get in your way or bring you down. So
Was there a particular moment, relationship, realization, or experience that changed things for you?
There were a few points that, everything started to disappear, like started to be taken away from me slowly by my use. I had to drop out of school. I was having custody issues with my daughter's mother, and rightfully so. She was worried, so she started taking my daughter more. I had my daughter less, wasn't able to see her for a bit, and those things would get me upset. But they were just kind of happening slowly and gradually over time, so you almost don't really notice it. But one thing that like really freaked me out when I was using, I started to hear voices and stuff, and I remember when I sobered up a bit, that like terrified the shit out of me, and but that wasn't enough, and I kept using for a little bit longer, and the last time I just went on this bender for like a few days, and I know that's not much to some people. Some people have a lot longer benders than that, but yeah, I was using for like 3 days straight. Was up, and I just finally sobered up, and I just looked at all the things that happened within those like 3 days, and like how this kept happening every time I would use. I would go through that, and then a few days later, I'd say, okay, I'm just gonna, do a little bit of like cocaine, or I'm gonna do a little bit of, oxy or whatever it was for an opioid, and I'm just gonna manage it, and just do it recreationally. And within 2 weeks, I was, it was getting to the point too with my wife where she started staying at her mother's house a lot, or her parents, I should say. And, when she would do that, I would actually I would get happy because I'd be like, okay, now I can use. And I have the house to myself. Because every time I would use, she'd be like, she'd be in my face, but in a good way. She wouldn't be screaming or hollering, yelling, but she'd just want the truth. And, she was all over me, which I'm grateful for now. At the time, I thought it was annoying, but yeah, that our relationship was getting worse, and then I that last time I went out for a few days and sobered up, I just kind of reflected on like what happened in the last 6 months, like what happened in the last 6 years, but then the last 6 months is when everything just started falling apart really bad, and I said, I have to do something about this, and I've already been going to AA for like a year and a half or so, maybe 2 years at this point, and in and out, in and out. And I knew I had that, and I knew the feeling that it gave me when I was sober, and it actually made me happy to be sober. And because prior to that, those 10 years where I was somewhat sober, I didn't feel happy. But AA, it definitely made me feel content with sobriety, and so I knew I had that in my back pocket.
What parts of healing and recovery do people rarely talk about?
I feel like no, but people just look at you not using the drug. That's all they look at. That's their measurement of whether you're now good or not good after addiction. But that's not a good measurement because you're not addressing what is really going on, what has led to the addiction. The addiction's just a symptom. And yeah, so I feel like that's not talked about enough. I think programs should, focus on that. I'm sure a lot do. I know AA definitely does. But, it's not going to help just to stay sober for a bit and get some knowledge about drug use, the harms, addiction, recovery, all that. You need to experience some profound, like, transformation. You need to be, like, still be who you are as a person, but also become a newer version of yourself that, is able to not have the things of the past weigh you down, be bothering you, and other things as well. So yeah, definitely, that's a big one. Not talking about what has truly changed about that person when they recover.
If someone listening is currently struggling, what would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that they can get sober. I never thought. I always thought that I could get sober, but I've always thought that I would have this obsession and urge for the rest of my life. And by going to AA, and this is not me trying to promote one program, the Almighty program. This is just me as someone that goes to AA that's found a lot of benefit. But going there every single day, and I was told this too in the beginning, and I just didn't go every day. But when I go every day, I have not had the obsession or urge within the last, 2.5 months since I've got sober. They may pop up again, at some point. I can't count that out, but try to have as many resources as you can. And obviously, get out of I know it's difficult sometimes to get out of the environment that you're in because of, it's hard to get into housing and financial reasons, but, try to stay away from the things that are contributing to your use. Find a new group of people. Like when it comes to AA or NA or there's lots of meetings in the city, other places as well, where you can just drop in and you're welcomed. And, when you have that support, have people that could listen to you and where you can listen to them and just really connect. You're not alone. There's a lot of people going through this. And, as long as you have the right supports in place, it really helps.
If someone listening loves a person who is struggling, what would you want them to hear?
I'd want them to know that, again, the person is sick. They're not, all these negative things that they're doing. It's not personal. It's the addiction, and that once that person recovers, you'll have your person back.
Thank you so much for your honesty and your vulnerability today. I know these conversations aren't always easy to have, and I'm really grateful you were willing to share your perspective and your experience. I think one of my biggest takeaways is that addiction isn't something that happens in isolation. It's a cycle, and understanding that cycle helps us to move away from judgment and towards compassion without losing sight of accountability. Thank you for sharing this with me and for sharing it with everyone listening.